Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Hope you're safe on this stormy evening wherever you are. Brandis Friedman is on assignment. Here's what we're looking at tonight. Reaction to former President Donald Trump's indictment. We hear opposing views from Illinois' congressional delegation.
They're funneling members' dues to the union's political action committee, and it's in violation of our CTU bylaws.
Some CTU members take legal action against the union for its big spending on Brandon Johnson for mayor. It could be the closest election in Chicago history. How Paul Vallis and Brandon Johnson are making their case in the final days of the campaign. How Chicagoans are coming together to celebrate Transgender Day of Visibility and spread awareness.
Why do it in the middle of the night?
We made the decision, and we did it for public safety.
And an airport bulldozed under cover of darkness, the 20th anniversary of the destruction of Megs Field. And we do want to update you on the weather situation this evening. The National Weather Service has issued several severe thunderstorm and tornado watches and warnings throughout the region this evening. Many of those have just now expired, including a tornado warning that was in effect for southern Cook County. Now, residents have been warned of hazardous conditions, hailstones, and wind gusts up to 90 miles per hour in some regions. Earlier today, tornadoes swept through parts of Arkansas with at least one person reported dead in North Little Rock and dozens of others injured. And more news today. Amid a hotly contested mayoral election, friction is growing within the Chicago Teachers Union. Specifically, a group of teachers has now filed legal action against the union, alleging union leaders are wrongly spending dues money on political organizations supporting Brandon Johnson for mayor. They say this is not about politics, but about their contention that their own union has deceived them.
This is not the way our union does business.
Mary Esposito Oosterbowski is one of a handful of Chicago Teachers Union members at odds with CTU's political activity. Last month, the union's House of Delegates voted to divert $8 in each member's dues each month, up to $2 million total, to political committees supporting Brandon Johnson for mayor. Oosterbowski says that is a violation of the union's bylaws, which state that political contributions are voluntary and do not come out of dues. She and others representing the Members First Caucus have filed an unfair labor practices charge with the State Education Labor Relations Board, and they want an immediate halt to the payments.
We're asking that PAC money be done voluntarily and that our money from our dues money should go towards member defense.
It's an escalation of an internal feud within CTU, which is spending big to elect one of their own as mayor. Last month, we spoke with members who were upset that the union had already lent $415,000 to political campaigns without getting approval from members.
Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, progressives, libertarians, Green Party, and so forth. And every one of those people have a right to be heard, and they aren't.
A spokesman for CTU responded to the filing today in a statement, saying, with so much at stake for our students, their classrooms, and Chicago's educational community, it is regrettable that such a frivolous matter is making headlines when this election will determine so much for this city and its working families. Esposito Oosterbowski says the union, through its vast political spending, is draining money meant for standard union activities.
We want to make sure that our money is kept separate, and that the money that is meant for members goes towards members.
And I spoke this evening with UIC labor expert Robert Bruno, who says the members have standing to file this action, but also says he believes union leadership is on solid legal ground because their House of Delegates voted on the money on behalf of all members. And some other top stories tonight. The man convicted of killing 15-year-old Hadiya Pendleton has been granted a new trial. That's due to an Illinois appellate court ruling that says the detectives who interrogated Mikhail Ward violated his right to remain silent. Pendleton was shot and killed in 2013, a week after she performed at the second inauguration of President Barack Obama. Cook County State's Attorney Kim Fox's office says it is reviewing the matter to determine next legal steps. Inflation is slightly easing, that's according to the Federal Reserve. But overall inflation still has a hold on the economy, and that's according to the Fed's favorite inflation gauge, which shows that consumer prices rose 0.3% from January to February. To move in the favorable direction as compared with this 0.6% increase from December to January. Up next, reaction to former President Donald Trump's indictment. That's right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Bipartisanship is rare in Washington these days, but two Illinois congressmen from opposite sides of the aisle have come together on the issue of classified documents. More specifically, they're proposing big-time civil penalties for anyone in power that mishandles those documents. This comes amid high-profile investigations involving former President Donald Trump and current President Joe Biden. And joining us are Congressman Mike Quigley, a Democrat from Chicago's North Side, and Congressman Darren LaHood, a Republican whose district stretches from Rockford to Peoria. We thank you both for being with us on this stormy Illinois evening. But first, Congressman Quigley, I have to ask about the news of the day, and that is the indictment of Donald Trump for his alleged role in a hush money scheme involving adult film star Stormy Daniels. Given all the investigations out there, do you agree with the Manhattan DA bringing these charges at this time?
Look, it's a grand jury that makes those decisions. I was a criminal defense attorney for a long time. I let them do their own legal process, and I can't spoil this kumbaya moment.
This kumbaya moment, bipartisanship, but I do have to ask, and I have to ask you, Congressman LaHood, you have experience as a prosecutor, your reaction to these charges?
Well, first of all, I think it's unusual. We haven't seen the indictment. Apparently, the indictment we're not going to see until next Tuesday. But I have real concerns about when our justice system, when you indict somebody and when it's politically motivated. And I put out a statement to that effect earlier today. A couple things to keep in mind, Paris. The former DA, Cyrus Vance, a Democrat, reviewed this case and decided not to prosecute. The U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York looked at the facts and evidence, decided not to prosecute. You have this prosecutor, Bragg, that comes in, George Soros gives him $1 million and he decides to prosecute. I just have a feeling
though, that's misinformation. It's indirectly to an organization that has supported Alvin Bragg.
Right, but George Soros today didn't deny that he gave $1 million to this fund that helped him. The last point that I would make is, I think if this was somebody named John Smith, I'm not sure they would be prosecuting them 7 years later on a charge that's never been prosecuted in the DA's office before.
All right, well, let's move on to the bipartisanship, the kumbaya moment, as you were mentioning, Congressman Quigley. So you both have introduced this legislation to address the mishandling of classified documents. A lot at stake, obviously. So tell us what this bill would do specifically.
Sure. Currently, the prosecutors, the Justice Department, when they look at something like this, they only have the opportunity to press criminal charges. But what we've seen here, that's a pretty high bar. And if there's a lack of intent, a requisite intent, basically there's no accountability. So Representative LaHood and I decided, as members, a former member of the Intelligence Committee, there has to be some accountability. So it makes sense that there be civil penalties when it doesn't reach the level of criminal prosecution.
And Representative LaHood, what would these civil penalties be? And is there different standards here based on intent? Specifically, if someone intended to keep these records versus they just kind of, oops, forgot that they had them?
Well, I think we realized there were loopholes in the law, and there was nothing that addressed carelessness, negligence, making a mistake, sloppiness, which we don't know the end of the investigations when it comes to President Biden or Vice President Pence or former President Trump. We'll see what happens with there. But there clearly is deficiencies in the law. And so what Mike and I did in a bipartisan way is came together and said what we can do to fix this. So the civil penalties are a punitive measure that prosecutors will now have as another tool in their toolbox, or the U.S. Department of Justice, which would do the prosecution that says, okay, maybe it's not intentional, maybe you didn't have knowledge, but we're going to fine you with a civil penalty up to $500,000 for each count. And then secondly, if in fact, moving forward proactively, if you don't go through the proper certification process for classified documents, you could potentially have your pension reduced as a government official, lose your security clearances. And these are measures put in place, again, to deter this type of activity.
Right, to deter this type of activity. Congressman Quigley, we've got the high-profile investigation of the Mar-a-Lago documents case with President Trump, former President Trump. Then all of a sudden, issues with President Biden when he was vice president, former Vice President Mike Pence, and classified documents. Why do you believe this has all started to bubble up now?
Happenstance. I think they're starting to look for this stuff, probably. And let me say, there's no excuse. Everyone who handles top secret documents is told and trained over and over again how to handle these documents and how important it is. It's not just our national security at stake. It's the men and women who keep us safe. And it's those from other countries who help us. Their lives are at stake, and the whole system of cooperation that's involved that's so important to keep this country safe. So there's absolutely no excuse. Why it's happening now makes no sense. I think Darren and I will tell you, I've never seen it happen in 8 years as a member of the committee. Democrats and Republicans are trained hard on this, and the process in which we see classified documents is very thorough. I've never seen an oops take place among the legislative branch so far.
But obviously in the executive branch, a few potential oopses here. Congressman LaHood, there has been some flashes of bipartisan in this current Congress. Do you think that this bill will pass on a bipartisan basis?
I do. You know, when Mike and I got together and talked about this, we went to each of our, conferences and talked to our colleagues, whether it's on the Judiciary Committee or the Oversight Committee or the Intelligence Committee. And broadly, Republicans and Democrats said, yes, we need to do something about this. We need to fix the statute. We need to make sure this isn't happening. Because really, Paris, in the end, this jeopardizes potentially national security. The last thing we want to have is our sources and methods of our intelligence community exposed, have, for some reason, our nuclear codes exposed, having our CIA case agents somehow exposed. So those are the things we're thinking about, the national security of the U.S. And so when it took us about 4 weeks to put this together, but I think it has broad bipartisan support. I know Mike and I look forward to moving it through the legislative process, getting a hearing on it, testifying, and hopefully getting it to become law.
All right, we'll see where that goes. Very quickly, Congressman Quigley, I want to pivot to an issue you followed, obviously, for a year, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The UN Human Rights Chief, Volker Turk, said that human rights violations are shockingly routine by Russia. Are we in a stalemate here that's going to be perennial for the next several years, or how do you see this being resolved?
It doesn't have to be. And again, on a bipartisan basis, I know there are those, but I think they're on the fringes who have sought to end the funding of this conflict from the U.S. and the West side. What I see on the Democrat and Republican side is strong bipartisan support. But what did President Zelensky say when he came to D.C.? Help us win quickly. It's hard to fund and maintain support for any conflict for a long period of time. He said the same thing when I visited Ukraine over last summer. So I think we give them the weaponry they need to win this war as quickly as possible.
And we just had an interview with former Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, who said this year and the coming months are highly critical in this conflict. All right, I have to leave it there. Congressman LaHood and Quigley, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Back with more right after this. With one final weekend of campaigning ahead of them, the race between Brandon Johnson and Paul Vallas for Chicago mayor is down to the wire, literally. WTTW News reporter Heather Schroen is here with a look at the final days of what is shaping up to be the closest election in Chicago history, if the polls serve as any predictor. Heather, first of all, we have this indictment in New York. A little bit of news out of New York, the indictment of former President Donald Trump. How is this seeping into the race for mayor?
Well, we heard Paul Vallas come out right away with the statement heralding the indictment as a victory for the rule of law. But immediately, Brandon Johnson sought to turn it to his advantage, using it to highlight the fact that Betsy DeVos, former President Trump's education secretary, she has a political action committee that she founded and funded, and that PAC has given $60,000 to boost Vallas's campaign and oppose Johnson.
And there were some former comments by Paul Vallas unearthed this week from when he was hosting hosting a radio show, which he called some of these investigations into Trump a quote-unquote witch hunt, echoing some of the Republican talking points right now. All right, so this mayor's contest has been defined by crime, violence, and all the concerns around those things. Who has the candidate who has the advantage with voters on this issue?
Well, it really depends on what part of the city you're campaigning in and who you're talking to. For people on the north side and downtown, they want the carjackings and the street robberies to stop. But if you live in a place like Englewood or Austin, maybe you're a little bit more worried about police reform and the police misconduct in addition to the violent crime. So this is an issue that means very different things to different people, and it's not clear which candidate is going to prevail.
And then some of the other issues that have taken center stage. Remind our viewers.
Well, the next mayor is going to have to deal with a projected deficit of over almost $500 million. There is still no agreement with ComEd to keep the city's lights on in homes and businesses, not to mention the fact that there are still real issues about whether investment on the south and the west side is equitable, and how, of course, the city is really going to continue to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Really everything is on the table,
Yes.
Heather. Everything is an issue right now, even though they're only talking about a few. So what do we know about folks that have already voted or voted by mail?
Well, so the trend that we saw in the first round of voting is continuing. It looks like more people are voting by mail. Of course, when all was said and done in the first round, 20% more people voted by mail than they did in 2019. That trend appears to be continuing. The big question is how much or will voter turnout raise from the about 36% in the first round? And of course, the big question, who does that benefit?
And the other big question is, will we know a winner on election night? Now, some of us predicted we might not know the winner of the primary on election night. We knew it right away. What about this time?
So I think it's a little bit of a closer call this time. So between election night and when all of the mail-in votes were counted, Paul Vallis lost approximately 3 percentage points over his margin over Brandon Johnson, who was in second place, of course. So if the finish is close on election night, you are not going to see news organizations like the Associated Press making a call in that race. And that means that we will have to wait and see when all of those ballots come in, because of course they have to be postmarked on Tuesday, but they have 2 weeks to arrive.
All right, Heather, let's rest up this weekend.
Yes.
All right, thanks very much.
Thanks, Ferris.
And visit our WTTW News voter guide for more information on the candidates for mayor and city council. Let's not forget that. You can search by name, race, or ward and find out where candidates stand on the issues. Just go to WTTW.com/voter guide. Today, people all around the world came together for Transgender Day of Visibility. It's a day to celebrate the resilience of trans and non-binary people. And despite the heavy rainfall in Chicago, dozens gathered to raise awareness about the ongoing discrimination community members say they are facing. Joanna Hernandez was at the rally and has more.
Out of the closets and into the streets. Out of the closets and into the streets. Out of the closet and into the streets. Out of the closets and into the streets. That's what dozens of people chanted as they gathered at Grant Park for a rally for transgender rights.
You must take repeated, direct action.
International Trans Day of Visibility takes place each year on March 31st. For 20-year-old Winter Darcy, it's an opportunity to stand with her community.
Well, it seems like, especially now, like trans people really need to come out and let everyone know we exist and we're just normal people like everyone else.
Let's go forward together. And I think that's...
At the rally, speakers raised their voices about the ongoing battles thousands of transgender people continue to face around the world. Volunteer Betty Alzamora says, as a queer woman, it was important for her to stand in solidarity during this turbulent period.
We are an island surrounded by a lot of other different states that have far more, if you will, draconian measures in place. I'm thinking of places like Missouri, Iowa, the state of Indiana. There are good people that live there who have right now politicians who are making things a lot more difficult.
According to the Human Rights Campaign, the nation's largest LGBTQ+ rights organization, more than 340 anti-LGBTQ+ legislative bills were introduced this year across the country, including 90 bills restricting medical care for trans youth.
When I found out that you could just come out as trans and you could say, like, I don't want to be considered a woman. I don't want people to look at me with all these prejudices just because of the genitalia I was born with. It's such a relief. And then once you once that opens up, it's almost impossible to close that back in.
Organizer Biff Hartwell transitioned from female to male, a journey he says he hopes inspires others to stand in their light.
There are a lot of organizations popping up specifically just to erase us and stop us from expressing ourselves. But on the other hand, it's inspiring in a way because it means that trans people are more visible than ever. And, this is a reaction in fear to people whose existence is making other people question their ability to express themselves.
A call for people to show up for love and reject hate is what Hartwell says he wants people to walk away with.
People who don't understand the trans community aren't really going to be able to relate to that, and suffering and pity don't really affect people and cause them to make actual changes. So we wanted to make this more of a celebration, and that's why a holiday like Trans Day of Visibility, which is about celebrating trans lives, I think is an important day to host an event like this on.
Celebrating lives like Darcy, who was able to live in a city she says has made her feel safe.
I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm from outside Philly, and it's different. It's a lot different there. Here I feel a lot more accepted, and I feel like I have a community directly. Like back where I used to live, there was only one other trans person I knew, and so here there's a whole large community of us.
This is a call for anyone who is tired of the shame, despair, and loss of life.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Joanna Hernandez.
In February, Governor J.B. Pritzker signed a law allowing Illinoisans to change their gender on their birth certificate. An airport destroyed in the middle of the night by the government. Sounds like the plot of an exotic spy thriller, but many of you may remember it happened here in Chicago 20 years ago this week. You may be familiar with Northerly Island. That's a man-made peninsula located between McCormick Place and Soldier Field on the lake. Now there's a large nature and conservation area, concert venue, and more. But if you were in Chicago prior to 2003, as I was, you may remember when this bucolic slice of the outdoors was something completely different. Built in 1925, it hosted the Century of Progress World's Fair. Starting in 1948, it was a single runway airport used by politicians and the elite to jet in and out of downtown. We thought it'd be fun to look back at the uniquely Chicago destruction of Megs Field. March 20th, 2003, here's Rich Samuels.
At 11 last night, the convoy of heavy equipment moved down Roosevelt Road toward the lake. At the airport, the backhoes began taking substantial bites out of Meg's one runway. Watching this was a handful of advocates who for years had fought the city in hopes of saving Megs Field.
If it's true that the airport's being ripped up, we're outraged. This would be awful. This is just a terrible travesty of our democracy. It's not the way things should work.
Secrecy shrouded the city's action. The FAA was not notified until the runway destruction was underway. There wasn't even time to notify air traffic controllers that they need not come to work this morning.
I found out, I felt like a pro athlete basically that was traded before the team told them that he was traded, and I found out driving into work this morning on the radio that it was closed. I was racing in, got a little nervous. I thought, this is my job. They gave me a little hassle at the gate. I explained my position. I got in, and the runway was torn up.
So you
to my
didn't get
surprise.
any notice?
At City Hall today, where protesters gathered immediately, the mayor said this was the right thing to do and the right way to do it.
Well, we took appropriate steps to do it.
Why do it in the middle of the night?
We made the decision, and we did it for public safety.
Thereupon, the mayor brought forward a city lawyer who said not only that the city could shut down Megs, but that it had to.
The city has unfettered legal authority to close this airport. It operates on a land lease with the Chicago Park District. That lease is a 30-day, month-to-month lease. The lease was terminated, and we are obligated to close this airport.
You didn't even notify the FAA before you began, did you?
The FAA and the Department of Homeland Security were both notified. They were not notified prior to, but they have been notified. It was their position that it was a local issue. It was their position that anything that we did here in regards to Megs Field to enhance the security in and around the downtown area, they were in agreement with.
Airline Juliet Pop Roger, still clear to land, wind 14017.
The Battle of Megs goes back at least 7 years. The city trying to close it and build a new park on its site, general aviation interests trying to keep it open. The city had planned to close Megs a year ago, but the mayor made a deal with former Governor George Ryan to keep Megs open in exchange for the governor's support for O'Hare expansion. The mayor says that deal died when an O'Hare funding bill died in Congress.
We went to Washington. They told us they threw in the towel.
And Megs seems dead too in the wake of last night's action that stunned the mayor's opponents.
There's no way you can beat Mayor Daley. He's going to get what he wants. He got it with Millennium Park. He got it with Soldier Field. He got it with the no-bid contracts on those bench, CTA benches. And now he's going to try to get away with this. Enough. Put a fork in me. I'm done.
I really don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor.
This was one of the boldest strokes of the mayor's career.
Fascinating piece of history there. The great Rich Samuels reporting on the overnight destruction of Megs Field, what you now know as Northerly Island. It happened 20 years ago this week. That is our show for this Friday night. Join us tomorrow night at 6 for Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. Could undecided Latinos be the critical swing vote in Tuesday's mayoral election? And then at 6:30 tomorrow on Chicago Tonight, Black Voices, a major change coming to Evanston's reparations program. Now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay sheltered right now. The storms are just passing by, and we'll see you this weekend.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that's proud to serve its community through pro bono legal services.
Next time on Antiques Roadshow.
I always thought it was something special, but I didn't really know much about it.
Special treasures are our specialty.
And you're not joking.
And I'm not clowning around
You're
with you.
not clowning around.
They are in museums all around the world.
Oh my gosh.
Many examples.
No copies, no transcripts have ever been made of this diary.
Watch Antiques Roadshow next time from the Idaho Botanical Garden in Boise.
Monday at 7 on WTTW.
On episode 1 of La Frontera, the U.S.-Mexico border has the most crossings of anywhere in the world. And on this episode, I'm going to the busiest place on the map, California and Baja California, where binational collaborations and the blending of cultures is an opportunity for explosive creativity and growth.
Good job. Yay!